was conference about 2 years ago. I remember I was going around talking to a lot of you all, telling you I was planning to move to New York City. Didn't really know what I was going to be doing, but I was asking you to pray for me and that God would be with me and guide and direct. And first of all, I want to say thank you so much to everyone in here who did pray for me and support me. Many people in this room have had a huge impact on my life, and I really appreciate that. Thanks. So I figured this afternoon I would just kind of give you an update of what I've been up to, what God's been doing, what I've been involved in, and just kind of the story of how I ended up in New York City in the first place. So it was New Year's Eve coming into 2019. My family and I were together. We were talking about setting New Year's resolutions and choosing a word for the year. The word that I chose was boldness. Specifically, being bold in sharing my faith and sharing the gospel with people around me. And I chose that word not knowing how God would hold me accountable to that commitment. And kind of in trying to live that out, I realized a couple things. One, I didn't really know how to share the gospel. I didn't know what that meant. And two, everyone around me had already heard, was already Christian. Everyone I worked with was Christian. My family's Christian. My friends were Christian. Everyone that I had a meaningful relationship with was already Christian, had already heard the gospel. And that kind of convicted me that maybe it was time for something in my life to change. Maybe it was time for me to change how I was living my lifestyle. I had grown up around missions, around the mission at Torian, but I really didn't know what that meant for me. Kind of led me on a journey of praying that God would give me direction. Several months of just praying and pleading with God that He would show me what He wanted me to change in my life, where He wanted me to go, what He wanted me to do. Kind of led me to a place of surrender, because before God would tell me what He had for me, I had to be willing to say yes to His command, even if I didn't know what it was, even if it didn't totally make sense, because He is our Lord, and we have to say yes if He's our Lord, even if we don't know exactly what that command is. So I remember making that commitment. Then maybe about a month later, I was at a missions conference, and I remember talking to a friend there, and I told him that I felt like God was calling me to something, but I didn't know what it was. And I remember he prayed for me right there in the display hall, and he prayed that God would give me direction. And He did. I walked right around the corner from praying with him, and I saw another friend there standing at a display table. I walked over to say hi to him. There was another guy standing right next to him, and he said, there's Austin. Get him signed up for the internship. I was like, what's the internship? So I talked with Matt there for a while. He told me about the internship. It was a chance to move to New York City and live there and get some training with a ministry training center there. And yeah, so I thought that sounds like a really good opportunity, a chance to get some training and teaching all while living and doing ministry right there in the city. So I talked to some friends, prayed about it, filled out the application shortly thereafter. Ended up going to the city for an interview. I remember being there for my interview. I was quite terrified. They sent me out with one other friend on the streets, and we had to talk to people and find certain things in the city. It was an adventure. I had no idea what I was doing, but it was really good. It was challenging. So I was accepted into the program, and I moved to the city in August of 2019. So before I continue on with this story, I wanted to share just a little bit about the Ministry Training Center It's located in Queens, New York. You can see the mission statement there, impacting eternity by empowering individuals to share the gospel globally. That's what they want to do. Their goal is to make a difference in eternity by teaching people, training people, and sharing the vision with people to share the gospel globally, making a difference in eternity by bringing souls into the kingdom. They have kind of 4 main programs, LTO, or long-term orientation, the World Outreach Weekend, or WOW. I'll talk more about those 2 programs a little later. The Serve NYC Internship, which is the program that I completed. And they also do debriefing for returning missionaries. So LTO, this is long-term orientation. It's a 6-week training program that takes place there in the city. It's designed for people who are interested in cross-cultural ministry, interested in serving overseas. They come to the city. We have classes on linguistics, world religions, team dynamics, missions, evangelism, and several other topics. It's really good, really challenging. I learned so much through that, and just my perspective on the world was broadened, and I would highly recommend it for anyone that's considering serving cross-culturally, serving at the mission, serving in Kenya, serving anywhere else. Just a really great way to get a good start into cross-cultural ministry. There, if you look at the pictures, that picture is us singing in the subway station. It's a great way to talk to a lot of people and hand out a lot of tracts. I really enjoyed that. This is my intern team, myself and Rochelle and Trish and Nathaniel. We had a lot of adventures together, learned a lot from each other, how to work on a team, how to get along, how to do ministry together. It was really good. And there's just a picture of the city from top of a tower in lower Manhattan. So after LTO was over, one of the responsibilities of the interns is to help with the WOW program. And I think there actually might be some of you in this room on some of these pictures. But yeah. So the WOW program is World Outreach Weekend. It's a 3 to 4 day program that church groups, youth groups, school groups can come to and have some classes similar to LTO on missions, often visit a Buddhist temple or a Muslim mosque, and do some outreach in the city, and also do some sightseeing. Really enjoy these groups. They're a lot of fun. There, if you look at the pictures, that's a group on the Brooklyn Bridge. This is a group in a temple, and this is in a subway station. And kind of what I did, one of the things I did in between was teaching English. Queens, New York, the area where I live, is arguably one of the most ethnically diverse areas in the world. It's estimated, this is a really low estimate, but it's estimated there are over 138 languages spoken in Queens, and it well could be closer to 200, but that's a low estimate. There's about 2.3 million people living there and about 108 square miles. So it can give you a little idea of how dense the population is there. There's people living there from all over the world, including many places that have never heard of the gospel of Jesus Christ and have no access to it. So teaching English is a great way to interact with these people, to help them in a meaningful way, to build relationships. Wasn't sure how it would go for me because I was never really a fan of school, especially English. But yeah, once I got into it, I really enjoyed it and got to teach students from countries like China, Thailand, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Tibet, just to name a few. It's so good to build relationships with people from other places in the world, just broaden your perspective, and I had a lot of interesting and difficult conversations. As you all know, in spring of 2019 or 2020, COVID-19 came to the city. At first, there was a lot of uncertainty and fear, and people didn't know what was going to happen, how bad this was going to be. Yeah, it was pretty scary at first. When the first restrictions were put in place, the other interns and myself, we decided we'd, go home for 2 weeks and wait it out and then come back to the city and finish out the program. Yeah, well, we went home and 2 weeks turned into more weeks and more weeks. And after about a month and a half, I had an opportunity to move back to the city and help with food distribution full-time. There's a lot of low-income immigrant families in the city that have a hard time making ends meet even without a global pandemic complicating things. And there was lots of people that had no access to government assistance and just had a hard time feeding their families. Over the course of about 4 months, I helped distribute about 270 tons of food. We did distribution lines and deliveries. There were times, there's a picture of a delivery line right here. There were times when in the mornings we had over 800 people standing in line for blocks and blocks and blocks. There's this unloading box in the street. There's a little picture of my delivery routes for the day, and there's my car full of boxes. We did this with help from organizations like CAM and Blessings of Hope. There's a lot of people that made this program possible. And through that, we were able to build so many relationships and contacts in the city. Actually, in the course of that, we actually started up a new Spanish-speaking church with almost completely contact from the city. So it was amazing to see how God used something that we never thought we would do, that we had no idea how we were going to pull off, and He used it for good, for His glory. When I first moved to the city, I knew that the internship was just going to be the first step in the journey that God had called me to. I really didn't know what would be next for me. I had some ideas, but God had some other ideas. So while I was there, an opportunity arose. I was asked if I would be willing to join the admin team serving with Destinations International. I thought about it, I prayed about it, talked to my family, and decided that I would accept it. If I think back to that commitment I had made to God in the beginning of 2019, I committed that I would walk through the doors that He sets before me, even if it doesn't make sense. This didn't make a lot of sense. Didn't really know what I was doing at first, but it was a door, and I decided I would give it a try. So D&I, or Destinations International, it's an Anabaptist mission organization that is working to plant churches among unreached people groups. You can see our vision statement and mission statement. Vision statement is to make Christ known, His name worshipped, and His word obeyed among every nation, people, and tongue. This is what we want to see happen in this world. And the mission statement, this is what we do. We partner with Anabaptist churches to recruit, train, send, and support teams to proclaim the gospel and plant reproducing, mission-minded Anabaptist churches. The bottom of it actually cut off. It says among unreached people groups there in the last line. So to talk about this a little bit, I want to just talk about two statements in here: unreached people groups and church planting. So what is unreached people groups, or why unreached people groups? A people group is defined as a significantly large grouping of individuals who perceive themselves to have a common affinity for one another because of their shared language, religion, ethnicity, occupation, class, caste, or combination of these. It's estimated that there are about 17,470 people groups living in this world today. And it's these groups that I believe that Jesus was talking about when He said, "Go unto all the world and make disciples of all nations." About 7,000 of these 17,000 people groups are considered unreached. Unreached is defined as a people group with little or no access to the gospel. without an indigenous community of Christians capable of evangelizing their own people group, generally agreed upon as being less than 5% Christian and less than 2% born-again Christian. This represents about 40% of the world population. 40% of the world population that have almost no chance of hearing the gospel. They'll live, they'll die, and they'll never meet someone who claims the name of Christ, much less even tells them about Christ. If we look at Revelations chapter 7, we can see just a glimpse of God's heart for these people. I'm going to read Revelations chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. We can see this is God's heart for these people, that they would be gathered around His throne, worshiping Him, praising Him in perfect unity and in perfect righteousness. And He calls us, as His ambassadors, to labor towards this goal through various means, one of which is church planting. So, why church planting? Because Jesus' last command in 28:19 was go and make disciples of all nations. We can do a lot of good things without planting churches, but we cannot do true biblical discipleship without planting churches. Discipleship happens in the context of community. Discipleship is the task of the church. It's the task of church planting. Church planting because the church is the focal point of Jesus' work and ministry. Christ loves the church, and He died for the church. He promised to build His church, and one day He is coming back for His bride, the church. The church is near to the heart of Christ, and it ought to be close to ours as well. Church planting is hard. It's complicated. It takes a long time. It's a lifetime commitment. It's not something you do in a 2-week trip or a 1-year trip or even a 3-year commitment. It's something that takes a lifetime. And unreached people groups are unreached for a reason. They're hard to reach. It's difficult. Talk to anyone who's been in missions for a long period of time, and they'll tell you that it's difficult. So practically, what does this look like? It looks like moving into a community and getting to know the people, building trust, showing Christ's love, sharing the gospel, and gathering them together to worship and praise God together. So, where are we doing this? I'll give just a real quick rundown of the different locations where Destinations International is serving. We have people in Mongolia. There they have a community center and a hockey program that they run as a way to build connections in the community and get to know people. Also in South Asia, I should mention that many of the places where we're serving would be considered creative access countries. Missionaries are not welcome there. And that's why I use general terms when I talk about locations, especially considering this is live streamed. But in South Asia, we have a team working in a primarily Muslim country. They run a business that employs some locals as well as work in a trade school and teach English. In Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, one of the worst areas in the world for prostitution and human trafficking, we have a team working there. They have a center called the Redeeming Rain Center. There they teach English and computer literacy and a few other things with the goal of helping children and adults to be able to find better work and break the cycle of prostitution, as well as share the gospel and build the church there. And God is doing amazing things in Cambodia, drawing men and women to Himself. In Spain, we have a team working primarily with immigrants from North Africa. There's a lot of people that come from North Africa and go up into Spain for work. Places that would be almost impossible to get into, but the people are there in Spain. They actually have a thrift store there that they get to know immigrant families and help them in that way. In Southeast Asia, we have a team. They have a financial literacy program that they use to teach principles from the Bible and share the gospel with people. Also in South Asia, we have a team working with a refugee people group. This people group is said to be one of the most hated people groups on the planet. It's a Muslim people group from a Buddhist country that faced genocide and were kicked out of their country. There are people without a country. The team there is working in a clinic, as well as some of them work at a coffee shop just outside of the camp. We have a team in Greece. With all the conflict in the Middle East, there's literally hundreds of thousands of people that have fled from their homes, having experienced the worst that Islam has to offer. And they flee to Europe in hope of a better life. Many of them encounter Christ along the way, and many of them pass through Greece. We have a team there working with these refugees from the Middle East, many countries. They spend most of their time discipling new believers and helping vulnerable women. We also have a team in Toronto working with First Nations people. They actually run a First Nations restaurant, one of the only of its kind in all of Canada. In New York City, we have 4 teams. The MTC team that I mentioned earlier. We have a team that's focused on reaching Jewish people. New York City has the largest population of Jewish people outside of Israel, with about 1.5 million people, Jewish people living in New York City. The team there is just working alongside people, building relationships, building trust, with the hopes of sharing the gospel and building the church there among the Jewish people. Also in New York City, we have a team focused on reaching people from Asia Minor. They recently opened up a coffee shop, Shepherd's Cup. Some of you might have some connections there. Great place if you ever get a chance to visit. And also in New York City is the admin team. This is a team that I'm a part of. Our office is about 3 blocks from the Missions Training Center. We have about four places that we're hoping to start teams in the near future. We have a team in formation to start a work in Quebec. Quebec is probably the most unreached place in North America. And we're praying and recruiting to start 3 new teams in Mexico and Thailand and somewhere in the Middle East. So, what is my role in all of this? My title is executive assistant. I work in the office with the president and the assistant administrator. I manage applications, communications, scheduling. It's a lot of office work. It's not glamorous, but it is so good to be a part of what God is doing, to hear so many stories of how God is moving and working, how He is using His people to make a difference in this world. So I would ask the question, it's a lot of information, a lot to see there, but what can we do? What might our role be in all of this? And there's a couple different ways I want to talk about how each of you can be involved. And the first would be to pray. Church planting is hard, missions is hard, and it's God's work, and God works when His people pray. Pray for Kenya, pray for Torian, pray for the work of D&I. We publish an Intercessors Bulletin monthly with prayer requests from all of our people. If you'd like to sign up for that, you can talk to me later. The second thing you can do is give. Destinations International, we follow the faith missions model, which means that we don't pay anyone in the organization a salary. We believe that God's work done God's way will never lack God's supply. If you'd be interested in giving, you can talk to me or pick up a flyer. There's flyers and information in the back on the right on the table. And thirdly, go. The harvest truly is plentiful and the laborers are few. If you feel that God is calling you, stirring in your heart, we've heard a lot of challenging, convicting messages this week. Challenges to go, challenges to love Christ with our lives. If you feel that, like our brother was sharing, talk to somebody about it. I'd love to talk to you about it. Talk to your pastor about it. And see how you might be called to serve God in this world among unreached people groups and church planting. In closing, I want to read an excerpt from a message taken from 10 Shekels in a Shirt by Parrish Reinhand. Two young Moravians heard of an island in the West Indies where an atheist British owner had 2,000 to 3,000 slaves. The owner said, "No preacher, no clergyman will ever stay on this island. If he is shipwrecked, we'll keep him in a separate house until he has to leave. But he is never going to talk to any of us about God. I'm through with all that nonsense." 3,000 slaves from the jungles of Africa brought to an island in the Atlantic, there to live and die without hearing of Christ. Two young Germans in their 20s from the Moravian sect heard about their plight. They sold themselves to the British planter at the standard price of a male slave and used that money they received for the sale to purchase passage to the West Indies. The miserly atheist planter would not even transport them. The Moravian community from Herrnhut came to see the two lads off, who would never return again, having freely sold themselves into a lifetime of slavery. As members of the slave community, they would witness as Christians to the love of God. Family members were emotional, weeping. Was this extreme sacrifice wise? Was it necessary? As the ship slipped away with the tide and the gap widened, the ropes had been cast off and were curled up on the pier. The young men saw the widening gap, linked their arms, raised their hands, and shouted across the spreading gap, "May the Lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering." This became the call of Moravian mission, the only reason for being, that the Lamb that was slain may receive the reward of his suffering. And think about that for a little bit. The Lamb that was slain, Jesus, may receive the reward of his suffering. Jesus Christ died on the cross so that we could be saved from our sins. Jesus Christ died on the cross so that all could be saved from their sins. He says that whoever believes on him should not perish, but have everlasting life. The reward of that suffering is that God's children on this earth would have forgiveness of their sins, would spend eternity with him. And 40% of this world's population has no chance of hearing that good news. So the question I would leave you with is Jesus worth it? Is Jesus worth our time? Is he worth our money? Is he worth our efforts? Is he worth us surrendering our career, our dreams, our hopes? All the things that I've talked to you about, it's just one way that a group of weak, fallible people that happens to include me are trying to live this out, trying to bring the gospel to those who've never heard and have no way of hearing, because the Lamb that was slain, Jesus, is worthy of all that we could ever do, all that we could ever surrender for his glory, for his praise. Thank you.